Morning, everyone. My name is Mark Saker. Let's just give another 30 seconds to make sure that everyone is in the room. And I think that should be more or less everyone. So, good morning, everyone. I hope you hear me well. My name is Mark Sakel. I'm a senior advisor on internal market and EU affairs at the Malta Business Bureau. I am based in Brussels, and the focus of my work, of course, is the single market, which is why I'm here presenting to you today and I have the pleasure to moderate this session. To give you a very quick context and also a breakdown of what this breakdown session will entail. Basically, we will have a very short presentation from my colleague Erwan Bertrand from EUROCHAMBRES. He is the head of the single market policy, and I have worked with Erwan for a long time, so I hope you take my word for it when I tell you that he is one of the finest minds on the subject of the single market. The single market itself is, in my opinion, a beautiful subject. Sometimes it seems a little bit up there, you know, but it's something which affects us all in our lives. And it's important to remember that when we talk about the single market in the context of the EU and what the EU has achieved, aside from decades of internal peace, the single market is undoubtedly the greatest achievement of the European Union. It affects all of us. I mean, the implementation of the 4 freedoms of movement of people, of services and goods and capital across such a diverse market is unparalleled anywhere in the world, and it has revolutionized the way we do business in the EU. We will have this short context on how we have got here within the single market, what is the current policy, and also then we will open the floor and pose some questions to the audience through an interactive tool on what we see, how we see the single market moving in the future. So Erwan, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mark, for this introduction and the kind words. I'm going to share my presentation with you, so that should happen very shortly. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. That's better. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And thanks again, Mark, for the kind introduction and the kind words. I'm very happy to be the presenter today and to talk with you about the single market. I hope we can keep the interaction lively today, and I indeed encourage you to intervene if you have a question or a remark, but I think we will have time for that later on in the session. I'm just going to start with a short presentation to talk a little bit about the current state of the single market. The single market, as it was said already, which is really a vast subject, I would say, because it really encompasses, everything related to the 4 freedoms, as we call them: free movement of goods, services, capital, and people, so labor as well. And I think that nowadays we can also add the free movement of digital services. So it's sometimes called also the 5th freedom. So vast subject. We will not be able to talk about every subject very much into detail, but my goal today is really to give you a bit of a general overview of what has been happening in the last years with the von der Leyen Commission, which started in 2019, but also to give you a few insights about the COVID crisis, of course, which had a big impact on the single market and still has, I would say. So future review focus on the single market. Let's go. So, of course, for us, for EUROCHAMBRES, we are the secretariat based in Brussels, representing the interest of the chambers of commerce. Chambers of commerce are very different in Europe, but nevertheless, they all represent in one way or another the interests of companies, mostly small companies. So that's our focus as well at EUROCHAMBRES. It's to make sure that SMEs really are well represented in Brussels, and that their interests are taken into account when the European Commission is drafting legislation. So that's why indeed why we attach considerable importance to tackling the many remaining obstacles in the single market. A lot has been done since the institution of the single market, which will be 30 years ago pretty soon. And so we continue to work on this. It's an ongoing work. It's not something that will ever end really, because the market changes. And of course, that means that the legislator needs to adapt and to tackle new issues when they are on the table. As I said, there's still a lot of work to be done, because we really notice that there's still a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises that don't export yet to other countries within the single market. And we would like to see these figures to go up, because for the moment only 1/4 of small and medium-sized enterprises are trading or exporting to other countries. Of course, some SMEs will never really do it. I guess that the local bakery will never really export to another market, but nevertheless, there's still a lot there. Their markets. So, what is the state of the single market for the moment? I think that we're all aware of the fact that the COVID crisis has not had a very positive impact on the European economy and on our single market. So we noticed that last year there was really a heavy contraction of the EU economy, so of the EU GDP in total. There was a contraction of no less than 6.3% in EU total GDP, which is really unseen in recent times. So that's not a good thing, obviously. And there was also, of course, accompanied by that, there was also a very sharp fall in intra-EU trade, with even a fall of 24% in intra-EU trade in the second quarter of last year. Again, this is really unseen in recent times, and obviously not a very good thing for business in Europe. You can see on your right a graph which shows the differences between member states with regards to intra-EU trade. And in changes in GDP. Some countries were obviously more affected than others. Yeah, so there have been some disparities there, but overall the picture was pretty bleak last year, which really means that the regulators and that governments need to act upon it. That was last year. I guess no big surprise for most of you. This year, things are going slightly better, but still we cannot speak about a very forceful recovery. Still not yet, because there was still a contraction of the economy year on year in the first quarter of this year, with only a slow recovery of 2.1% in the second quarter year on year. So that's it's, yeah, we can talk about the recovery, but we can't say that it's really very spectacular. So, of course, causes of the current economic downturn, that's something that we need to look at as chambers of commerce. Obviously, COVID was the direct effect, that was the direct cause, I should say. So the effect of the lockdowns and other measures have had a very severe impact on business in general. But of course, we need to look further than that. That's quite important. So I think we could talk about direct causes, but also some indirect causes caused by the COVID crisis. And I would say that a lot of economic harm has been done in the past year and a half or so because of unilateral decisions made by member states, made by national governments to close their borders. So in practice, that meant, and I'm sure that a lot of you are entrepreneurs, and a lot of you have noticed that indeed it was very difficult to either to travel to other member states or to export to other member states. And this is indeed because governments have installed unilateral measures to close their borders during certain times. Now, it is understandable to a certain degree, of course, that member states wanted to shield their population from further harm from the COVID disease, of course, from the virus, but there are limits to it, of course, and we do feel that sometimes it went a little bit too far. So there were a lot of restrictions to free movement of people, services, and goods, and inevitably this had a large effect on the supply chains, which is very problematic, of course. In addition, what happened is that these unilateral measures to restrict trade and to cut off the borders, that the measures were badly communicated, which means that entrepreneurs were not always very well aware of what was happening. So these measures were also often communicated in a very late fashion, which means that, of course, as a business, you cannot really make plans in advance if you want to export a product or send a posted worker to another country, for instance, to work in a factory somewhere else, or because of some machinery needs to be repaired. So that was really a problem. We heard a lot of stories from entrepreneurs about this in the last year and a half, and of course, yeah, this unpredictability causes confusion among businesses, which is never a good thing if you want to have a stable business environment. Who was mostly affected? Yeah, of course, everyone was affected. We were personally affected, but also businesses were affected. And it was, according to the Commission, according to a study of the Commission that was released quite recently, it was mostly small and medium-sized enterprises. And they all, many of them, so 60%, and I'm surprised it's only so low. I would be surprised if it would be more. 60% of SMEs reported a fall in turnover in the last year. And of course, you know, there are differences in sectors. There are some sectors that did still relatively well. We can think about digital services, but there are other sectors that did tremendously badly, obviously, such as the tourism sector that was really very severely affected. This also has had as an effect, actually, that companies and SMEs in particular have deferred investment decisions, and many SMEs have also said that not only have they deferred investment decisions, but they have invested less in the past year and a half, which is, of course, not good for our economic growth. So, as I said, yeah, there were a lot of sectors that suffered, some more than others. I think an obvious one is tourism. The automobile sector as well suffered a lot, textiles, and another obvious sector I think that was heavily affected were the cultural and creative industries. So there is really a problem with the unilateral measures that were pushed through by the member states. And of course, we knew already before that the single market wasn't perfect before the COVID crisis broke out. So these measures, they came actually on top of the barriers that were already existing in the single market. So we really very much hope that the extra measures that have been implemented by the member states are going to be temporary and not permanent, because you know, protectionist measures have this nasty habit of sticking, basically. And so this is really something that we're monitoring at EUROCHAMBERS to make sure that we inform member states, but also the Commission about these measures that have been implemented in the past months. As I said, there were already a lot of barriers before the COVID crisis broke out. And the single market isn't perfect. It's a little bit by definition an imperfect dream, actually, that needs to be achieved still. And indeed, you know, 70% of entrepreneurs already in 2018 told us in a survey that they were not entirely happy about the single market and about their possibilities to export freely within the single market. 70%, which is a very high figure, I think. So you know, it got us thinking. 70% when we saw that figure in 2018, it got us thinking, and we thought it would be good to do a global survey with SMEs to hear about their thoughts about the single market, and really to hear about their perspective. So we did a survey the year thereafter, just before the commission, the current von der Leyen commission, started its work, and we had more than 1,100 companies that replied to the survey. So they really told us, you know, what for them are the biggest obstacles within the single market to trade freely. And then of course, we want to be constructive. We also asked them what for them would be the best solutions to palliate these issues, basically. So and we shared, of course, the results of this survey to the European Commission just when the von der Leyen Commission started. So these are the main obstacles. Maybe you can relate to some of them. Maybe you even participated in the survey that we did a few years ago at the end of 2019. There were no big surprises, actually. Complex administrative procedures is something we always hear a lot about, but it came on top of the concerns of the companies that we surveyed 2 years ago. So that's really the biggest issue for the moment. Different national service rules. It's also not a big surprise. There are very different rules in the different member states, and of course, better harmonization of these rules would be a good thing. So indeed, more than 70% of the companies said that this is a problem. Another one, which is very important, is inaccessibility to information on rules and requirements. Of course, that's hugely important for entrepreneurs when you want to do business in another market. You need to know how that market functions, and you need to know what formalities you need to fulfill if you want to do business over there. And there is not enough information about what kind of rules and requirements you need to fulfill when you want to do that, basically. Then number 4, yes, it's the national product rules. It's a bit like the service rules, lack of harmonization. Something needs to be done there. And then the 5th is different contractual and legal practices. As I said, we want to be constructive, and so we also asked the companies what would be the best solutions to make sure that trade goes better within the single market. So we presented 16 suggestions to the entrepreneurs that we have surveyed. And of course, yeah, cutting red tape always comes on top. I think that's important. So that's a message that we need to keep on passing to the European Commission. So of course, there's another one: better and clearer information on an EU online portal in different languages concerning all necessary products and formalities to operate in another EU country. I think that relates to one of the previous points on the previous slide, on the lack of availability of information in other markets. Actually, the Commission is working on this. There is a single digital gateway upcoming, but it's still too little, basically. So, for instance, through this single digital gateway, there will be certain procedures, administrative procedures, that will be made available online, and that the national governments will have to put online, but it's still quite limited, and it's limited to only a small number of administrative procedures that entrepreneurs need to fulfill when they go abroad. 85% said that administrative simplification for trading goods and services in other EU member states by making available a maximum number of procedures through an online web portal is important. So that's what I was talking about. 83% said that improved implementation of EU law via more cooperation between member states and EU Commission on enforcement is important. And more than 80% say that, yeah, SMEs, and I think our CEO, Ben Butter, said it in his introductory words, that indeed the laws that are made by the European Union, they should be better adapted to the needs of the SMEs. Indeed, we still see far too often that new laws are coming, but the Commission has, some big companies in their mind when they draft a law, and they don't really think about the SMEs who are then also affected by the law, and that is really quite problematic. And we often talk to the Commission about this exact problem. So, we analyzed all these figures that we got from the entrepreneurs, and based on those, we issued 8 recommendations for the current commission term, for the current commission of Ms. von der Leyen. So I think the number one for us is really to tell the policymakers, whether they are in Brussels or in the national capitals, to tell them, yeah, please commit to the single market, because each time that there's a competitiveness council held, so with the ministers in Brussels, we see that there are a lot of nice declarations about further integrating the single market and about and about really making it better for entrepreneurs. And there are a lot of calls that are issued in these conclusions of these council meetings, but the problem is that on the ground we don't see really enough follow-up. Really, we see a lot of calls, but then we don't see a lot of concrete follow-up, and that's why we really ask the governments at different levels really to be cooperative and to be creative and to actually act upon the issues that are out there, and not just say that the single market should be further integrated, because that's a little bit too easy, basically. So second point, improve the implementation and enforcement of the single market. Again, I think that my CEO, Ben Butters, already touched upon this in his introduction, but that's quite important because, of course, you can have the nicest rule book in the world about the single market, but then if the rules don't get implemented, then we have an issue. And that's also a message to the Commission, to ask the Commission to make sure that the rules are well implemented and to use its toolbox whenever rules are not well implemented in certain member states. So we ask the Commission really to go after these member states that are not really implementing the laws well and which are positive for companies. Less complexity, yeah, I think that ties pretty well with what the entrepreneurs were saying. And then that's actually one of the most important points for us at EUROCHAMBRES, is really to make the development of the single market for services the #1 priority of the policymakers. Since the Services Directive of, I would say, almost 15 years ago now, we have seen very little progress in this area. And again, a lot of empty words, which are unfortunately not followed by concrete actions. Of course, a better framework adapted to the needs of the SMEs, that's important. We need a better capacity for problems solving services like Solvit, Solvit is a tool basically that helps companies to solve issues related to the single market. Less bureaucratic burdens, and of course, also a very important aspect for us, it's the respect for the country of origin principle. So the forward-looking perspective here, and I'm going to finish with these 2 slides here. We really want actually the European Commission to be, as it should be, the guardian of the treaties. We have seen with these all these measures that have been implemented by the government during the COVID crisis, these unilateral measures to protect their population. And of course, you know, health reasons have been invoked, and health reasons can always be invoked. Public health issues can always be invoked by a national government to restrict movements between countries. But of course, there are limits to this, and we really want the Commission to better monitor the situation. Well, monitoring they did, of course. They monitored the situation. They were pretty well aware of all these unilateral measures that have been implemented by the national governments. But then, of course, it's important that the Commission acts upon them. And what we ask the Commission to do is to really take into account the proportionality and necessity principles. You know, a lot of measures that have been implemented were not proportional and maybe not necessary to achieve a certain goal. And when restrictive measures are implemented, it should pass this test. And we think that a lot of the measures that were implemented didn't pass this test, unfortunately. So what did the Commission do, basically? Well, they have different tools in their toolbox. What they did was quite soft, we should say. They sent notification letters to different member states that were going a little bit too far in their unilateral measures to restrict trade. What we would have wanted is that they especially if the member state wouldn't give suit to the notification letter, it would be, for instance, to start an infringement procedure, which is a much more formal and much, I'd say, a much more forceful measure towards a national government. But we haven't seen any of these, which is a bit unfortunate, I would say. Of course, in the future, we will have to think about, what we should do and how we should manage these type of crises, because we really see that there's a tension in the political structure with regards to health policy. In the current treaties, it's made clear that health policy is and will remain, at least for the foreseeable future, a national competence. But maybe something will need to change in the near future, because if all member states can just close their borders or really restrict access to their territory, that's really problematic. And maybe we want the European Commission to take up more powers and coordinate things a little bit better. Most recently, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen held her State of the Union. As expected, she didn't say so much about the single market, which is a little bit unfortunate. She really focused much more on her twin transition, which she has been talking about since the beginning of her mandate. So what are we talking about when we talk about the twin transition? It's really her big focus on durability, on the green transition, and on the digital transition. So really trying to make the economy more green, but also trying to make the economy more digital and more adapted to the tech of today, let's say, which is good. But we do have the impression that the Commission is focusing almost solely on these twin transitions and forgets that there are also more traditional areas like the single market that need its attention.
Erwan, if you can wrap up because
so I'm pretty much done, actually. So the European Commission issued a first annual single market report that was just a few weeks ago. Again, I think we think that there's a bit of a lack of ambition here, especially we didn't see much about the further integration of the services area, which would be good. The Commission is really also focusing on sectors now, rather than having a horizontal approach, but okay, to be seen how that pans out. And the Commission also proposed a new instrument, which is the single market emergency instrument, in order to avoid all the problems that surfaced in the past year and a half, I would say. So there will be a consultation pretty soon about the governance structure, about how to avoid critical product shortages, which was also a problem, and of course to ensure that free movement is not affected too heavily in a crisis situation. So there will be consultation. Of course, EUROCHAMBERS will participate in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erwan. And now we will pass on to the participants. We have created a few questions for you to break the ice, and also it's a bit of an interactive tool. I never knew it existed until last week, and I think it's really brilliant. It's called Mentimeter, through which we'll be asking you questions on the single market, which would then facilitate our discussion. Martina, yep. Can you put it up, please? Okay, on the top you should have a view options, and you to select the screen sharing, and it will say Martina Spiteri, and then you will have a slide. You will have a slide in front of you with a QR code and a code. Is there someone who is not seeing this? Okay, it seems like everyone is seeing it. So perhaps if you would just grab your phone and type in menti.com and enter the code, you will have access to our interactive tool. Is there anyone yet who has not logged in? Okay, seems like everyone is there. Martina, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So very quickly, some quick icebreakers. Just also to get used to the tool before we start using it seriously. What is, in your opinion, the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the single market? You have an opportunity to try to type in 3 answers. You could do less if you wish, and we will see the answers pop up in real time on the screen. We're already seeing some interesting answers here. We've got a couple of people saying free movement, removal of trade barriers, you know, the things which really come to heart when businesses are trying to access other markets and other member states of the European Union. Abolition of tax barriers. Tax, of course, is always an issue. Inclusivity, common policies. Thanks. Let's move to the second slide. These are, I'm not going to ask for discussion right now because these are just 3 quick icebreakers to make sure that we get used to the tool. Has the single market been beneficial to your company? Or to you, huh? Either to you or to your company. And already the answers seem to be telling with a survey that we had in 2019 when we had asked 150 local companies, has the single market been beneficial? Overwhelmingly, they answered yes, but of course then problems persist. Unless there are more answers, Martina, perhaps you want to change the slide? And what is the most relevant for your company? Free movement of goods or services or capital? This is also for us so that we can get a bit of a profile of our audience and to ensure that the discussion remains relevant to you. Are there any more replies? Okay, next slide, please. So now we'll start talking a little bit about the single market itself, about the problems that exist. We have a lot of, we've heard a lot of times, also everyone, perhaps I'll ask you to speak a little bit here. We've heard a lot of times that that the single market is that accessing the single market is some unachievable dream for a lot of businesses due to the complexity involved. It's not worth the time and the effort is things we've heard a lot. Erwan, what do you think about this?
Well, an achievable dream, yeah. Well, in a way it is, because the market is changing. So, you know, for the moment, the legislator is focusing a lot on new technologies and harmonizing rules of the member states on these technologies. I'm thinking about AI, about, you know, for instance, the Digital Services Act as well. So yeah, it's a never-changing environment, and so the legislator needs to adapt to it. But what we want, of course, is the legislator and the authorities to adapt more quickly to the realities of the day and really to act upon the issues that are being brought forward by the entrepreneurs. So yes, we you know. It's what is important to know is that there's still a lot of untapped potential, and we would like this untapped potential to be you know, to be tapped into basically, because that's not happening.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, of course, it also comes down to if the information is available on how they can access markets across member states borders, and a lot of times they tell us that that's simply no, it is not. Perhaps is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak up on this point? Yes, Stephen, I see Stephen D'Alessandro.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stephen D'Alessandro. I'm the Executive Director of Advenio E-Academy. We are focused on developing accredited courses for entrepreneurship. Let me state my bias. I believe in Project Europe. I've long considered myself a citizen of Europe from a minute little village called Malta. As you said, it is a concept, Europe, that calls for hard work. The fact that we haven't had war in Europe for so long is not a matter of chance. It's because, there has been cooperation at different levels between the countries. Peace doesn't come for free. Quality of life doesn't come for free. My criticism, and where I think we need to have more action, especially from the point of view of SMEs, is that in Europe, and this has trickled down, we see it particularly evident in Malta. We have institutions where we have the authorities are very strong with the weak and very weak with the strong. And this has distorted market economics. Even the tools that we use, the EU talks about sustainable development, and yet we have frameworks like Professor Kate Raworth's, the donut economics, where you are balancing the quality of life and environmental sustainability. These issues we talk about, but there's no real bite to it. We're not relating access of EU funds to performance on these areas. We talk about control of projects. We find, infinite detail in analysis of Erasmus spending, and then millions go by on infrastructure projects because there are no control. SMEs, again, we have directives in the EU to include SMEs. In Malta, all public contracts are totally against the involvement of SMEs. There is no fair contract available. And if you follow it up, the point is we can go to court. That's not the solution. We need to have real action, not talk. I think SMEs are sick and tired of hearing politicians say the right things and doing nothing concrete about it, or very little, let me be honest. So we need action so that things actually happen. Unfortunately, the institutions, I take the banks as a case in point, government came up with a scheme locally for safeguarding guarantees, and the little piggy banks we have here in Malta couldn't even deal with it. SMEs are very badly served. And despite that, they still form the backbone of our economy. So, people need to realize that there has to be more investment in resources to SMEs.
Thank you, Mr. D'Alessandro. It's a very good point that you made, particularly about public procurement, which is something which has been brought to our attention a lot of the time. Yes, Joe, please.
Mark, quickly, first of all, well done, Stephen D'Alessandro, for saying things as they are. Thank you very much for your intervention. I have a supplementary question to what Stephen was saying, and for mostly for Erwin and yourself also, Mark. At a point in the presentation, there was a reference, and correct me, I hope I did not understand incorrectly, there has been a lack of development in single market policy in recent years. Why is this?
Shall I start, Erwan, and then you continue?
As you wish, you can start. You can kick off.
Okay, because it's something which I like to talk a lot about. So basically, we're seeing in recent times, a lot of due to political reasons, some protectionism from member states. It's easy to forget, but the reality is that when we signed up to the single market, member states ceded a little bit of their sovereignty in order to be able to get access to a market of 500 million people. It seems that they have forgotten that. The benefits, of course, are obvious because they have access to a much bigger markets than they would have previously been able to access. Yet, due to political reasons, a lot of high-profile elections at home, people are questioning this secession of sovereignty, and are questioning the facts that foreign companies have as much rights as local companies in local markets, and this is of course being reflected in the positions those member states are taking in the institutions, which is leading to a lot of good initiatives by the Commission, and also some not so good ones being rejected at the formative stage. Yeah. That's my answer, everyone.
Yeah, I can only agree with you, Mark, and I think it's really a political problem. Now, is it a problem created by Brussels, or is it a problem created by the capitals? I think that's also an important question to ask ourselves, and I think it's mostly a problem created by the capitals. It's mostly the countries that are members of the European Union that are not very willing to further this single market project, at least when it comes to further integration. And again, I think a very good example is the services sector. The previous commission, so under Jean-Claude Juncker, they made some proposals, not the most ambitious ones even, about further integrating the services sector, but they were just bluntly shut off by certain member states, and mostly the bigger ones, the bigger member states. And that's really a problem, because there are a lot of studies, different studies from different institutions, from think tanks, from people like us, saying that more work needs to be done in that area, but it's just not being picked up by these member states. I think the Commission, representing the interest of all the countries, is picking up the message, but they're getting, if I may put it like this, they're getting cold feet to make proposals in this area, because they probably are, they probably know in advance already that it will be blocked at some point during the legislative negotiations, and that their proposals will be blocked in council. So what happens is that they cease to propose new laws which should further integrate the single market for services, and we do have a bit of an issue there.
Exactly, couldn't agree more. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to the next question, because time is pressing. Martina, please. Martina, thank you. No, from before, thank you. From your experience, dear members of the audience, what barriers do companies encounter when selling goods and services across borders, or importing as well? I'm not entirely sure if this question is, if you can put more than one answer, but if you can, please feel free. If not, just choose the one which is most important to you.
Say, Mark, here the major issue I see usually is the fact that we get different interpretation even up to certain things of how to deal with a contract, for example. So there isn't like a base unified, even for example, entering in contracts, for example, we do cross-border trade, but dealing with entities or customers across the border within the EU, establishing a common arbitration center, a common base of a contract starts becoming very complicated, because there is no one unified baseline of, let's say, contractual law which one would refer, because obviously everybody would want to refer to his own country. Whereas if there would be at least one, let's call it a bit similar to the GDPR, there are the same GDPR principles and the law which then are enshrined. We don't have something which is coherent in terms of the contractual engagements which one goes in for projects across the EU. So we end up saying, okay, I'm doing a project, and the project happens between here and Italy, and the customer would want to make it under the legislative laws of Italy, which is a total mess compared to maybe what we are used to, and not even the principles align. So you start going into a lot of problematic areas, which as soon as it goes beyond a basic service delivery, it starts becoming a very expensive and complex thing to actually implement. Yes. So with the lack of a base understanding of how contractual aspects would be applied cross-border, it becomes that with each country, you have a total different mix. And that's why probably I feel one of the strong options why the single market is failing in a lot of things, because you can do simple things. As soon as I start to do something a bit more complex in a project, in a service delivery, in a contractual obligation, it becomes a major blocker where you would require lawyers or a setup in country to be able to operate. So it's not truly a single market. It's just, okay, we're friends, we can connect, we can come over and let's try and set up something in the country, which is not what a single market should be about. So there is the principle of the single market, but there is no true implementation of the single market. There is only a connection. And yes, we have freedom of movement of people. And I think that's the one which is working best, okay, pre-COVID. But on actually being able to deliver that aspect of the contractual business aspect, I think it's very limited. And it's in the interest of all the chambers to have it aligned. But then you go into the protectionism of local companies who have no interest of getting foreign companies penetrating their market. Yes. So you get even things like companies coming in or services and them wanting the training in a local language, for example. Yes. So they use that as a basis of discriminating against foreign importers, even across the EU.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Grech. I couldn't agree more. Also, one of the biggest complaints we have heard is also indeed a lack of harmonization of rules on the ground, actually, when in terms of contracts, in terms of public procurement, in terms of so many other things. First of all, there's the language barrier that is hard enough to jump over as a hurdle, and then of course there's dealing with all the different legal systems and different interpretations and different implementations, even of EU law sometimes, that pose a lot of barriers for businesses. Erwan, would you like to add anything here?
Well, I think it's a very pertinent remark. I think it's also something that came forward in the results of our survey. So, and you know, it's also something that we addressed in our suggestions to the Commission when they started. It's to really tackle this point. I think it's really problematic. Of course, yeah, it's something that is difficult to weed out, but nevertheless, there have been a few. We need to be a little bit optimistic. At least there have been a few initiatives. For instance, I talked about it earlier, the Single Digital Gateway, which is about forcing the national governments to put certain procedures online. So if you want to do business in another country, that these procedures, you don't need to go to the other country to actually fill out papers, etc. But these procedures are available online and also in English, and according also to the once only principle, which means that you wouldn't have to give all your inputs, all your information to the administration in the other country, but it means that some of the information that your national authority already has will be passed through automatically to the other country. So I think that through initiatives like this, it should be making things better. And indeed, we would like the Commission to focus more on that type of initiatives.
Thank you so much, everyone. Martina, next slide, please.
Sorry, maybe we just to highlight one other point on this.
Yes, of course. Yes,
is there a potential of actually establishing an EU contractual baseline, which one could agree with the customer to refer to? So that would be a much more practical way, because by the time we get all the digital services, it's going to take us another 20 years. So in reality, if one would say, listen, there is an EU contractual law as a baseline, and then what you can do is saying, I'm not in country, I'm cross-trading, and what I can agree with the customer is we will not use the laws of Estonia, but we will apply the contract against an EU contractual law, which pure man or everybody
there have been discussions
understand.
on this, but I think it's going to be not for tomorrow or something like this. And indeed, yeah, well, there have been some timid discussions about this in Brussels, but they haven't been very much into the picture in the last years. But of course, we shouldn't forget that as an entrepreneur, you have contractual liberty, and if you do business with another business, and if it's only a business to business contractual relationship, of course you can decide among yourselves which laws will prevail in case that there are issues surfacing.
Just one point on this. This was an opportunity that Malta missed, because we are very fortunate that in Malta, we have two national languages, English and Maltese. So a court case can be heard in English. So for many international contracts, applying Maltese law means that you can have the court case heard in English straight away. Again, you can apply, for example, UK law in Maltese courts. There are a lot of complications, but as my colleague mentioned, it's when you come to the details that it becomes extremely expensive, because you've got to get experts in that particular field. And again, from an SME perspective, very often the SMEs work because the network is based on personal relationships. You know, it's not based on the institutional relationship. So often it's easier to find consensus. And this is where there is an opportunity for example, organizations like MBB to provide mediation, I would say, where there is some, joint credibility, or EUROCHAMBRES. Again, another service that you want institutions that are looked at, because the national courts, in many cases, have proved too slow. And, by the time you get the remedy, it's pointless. So there is a lot that can be done in this area to give alternative solutions, not complete, but at least you've got something, your plan B, so to say.
Thank you, Stephen. Sadly, the time is really pressing, so Martina, perhaps if you can move to the next slide. Do you plan to incorporate artificial intelligence into your day-to-day operations? Now, artificial intelligence is not as out there as most people think. Actually, artificial intelligence is really applicable to all facets of everyday life. Erwan, perhaps you can elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, not too much. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but of course, AI, artificial intelligence, is a bit the talk of the day for the moment. Also in Brussels, there are new laws coming up to harmonize the different rules. But of course, AI, it's a pretty broad concept. It's not because it's the talk of the day that it's something completely new. It's something that was already used in the past. Only now, of course, AI should be understood also as a technology which enables companies to do certain things, to automate certain things without human intervention, basically, according to certain algorithms and machine learning, etc. Whereas in the past, there would have been maybe more human intervention when using certain data sets and when certain algorithms were used. Now it's really the artificial intelligence systems themselves that are making decisions, and so it would be interesting to hear if indeed for certain of your operations, whether you're planning to use this new type of artificial intelligence, which doesn't require that much human intervention.
Is there anyone here who would like to make a comment?
May I, Mark? It's Andrea Fenek here from the Malta Chamber. Apologies for missing part of the discussion at the beginning. I think this is a tricky question, really and truly. I would like to hear from the operators themselves. I think it varies a lot on the level of expertise on the subject from one sector to the other. But I can tell you that, for example, there are some, even the more traditional sectors that are looking very closely into AI, such as retail, for example, and other segments as well, even locally in Malta. So I think there's still lack, of course, of knowledge and information on the benefits of AI, introducing it, and the benefits that it will bring into someone's operations. You have to see as well the initial capital outlay that would be required to introduce AI in one's operations, and sort of do a cost-benefit analysis on what it would bring about, and also the recurrent cost and the type of expertise, not just in subcontracting maybe to an IT company, but also having someone who is in-house to manage at least the flow in terms of artificial intelligence. So I guess this it varies a lot from one sector to another. But as you rightly pointed out, even at a European level, this is still a discussion which is, you know, in its early stages. But I would like to hear from the operators themselves to see, of course, their points of view.
It is especially important to hear from people like you and also entrepreneurs to hear, you know, what kind of AI, if so, you would like to use in the future, because indeed there are already discussions in Brussels now about certain types of AI that might be put on blacklist and might be prohibited, so-called high-risk AI applications. So for us, you know, as interlocutors to the European Commission and to the institutions, it's important for us to hear whether yes or no, certain types of AI are really high-risk applications or not.
I know that, for example, audit firms and other firms are definitely interested in terms of data mining, for example, and then selecting data. But I think Francois, who is definitely one of the most competent here and on this sector, will be able to elaborate.
Thanks, Andre. I think as much as I like the AI, I mean, we provide AI technology. We are a technology company. So it's one element of what we provide to companies. But I would say, apart from the sexiness of the day, which is now AI and everybody wants to have an AI box somewhere, in truth, we are failing on digitization. So most of the SMEs haven't even gone to a decent stage of digitization and automation. And yet we are trying to preach to them that they should use AI. Most of them will fail miserably because they haven't even gone from step one. They haven't taken a chunk of the SMEs, a big chunk, haven't moved from manual operational processes to digitized processes, to automation, and then we can get to the niceties. So we can have AI, big data, etc. And people, you meet people and say, yes, I want AI. You cannot get AI. You don't even have 3 other steps before. And I think we're missing the boat in the, as much as in the research and technology side, we need to push and legislate for AI solutions coming up. But as a future of Europe, we have probably a very big lack of digitization of SMEs, which should be the major drive for the agenda. The one which will drive the tangible impacts in the next 3 to 5 years. The AI will not drive the tangible impact in 3 to 5 years. The digitization of the SMEs to improve their bottlenecks, to improve their operations is more significant in the short term. We need to work on legislation, structure, and how the operational impact of using AI, definitely. But the drive of funding, that should be a research box of how I'm putting some EU frameworks to stimulate AI research and build our own European AI frameworks, which we need to put in place. But from an SME perspective, we're failing on basic digitization. We're going 3 steps too fast. And what's happening is we're alienating SMEs. So they're saying, oh, this is too far for me, because the first step they need to do is still digitize. And we're there 15 years after activities of digitization have started, and it's been relatively still unsuccessful. So the portion of SMEs going into relative higher level of digitization is not getting there. And that's the primary problem. That is what will give us return and GDP growth, because the companies become more efficient and effective. Before we even start dreaming of telling them put AI in place, that's a dream. They haven't, some of them are still working with Excel-based methods, and they haven't even moved to digitized systems, to some level of automation, to remote systems. And we're trying to tell them, okay, now let's do a skyscraper. They haven't even built a house. Yes, and I think from a policy perspective, I think it does not make sense at all. The first step is saying, what is the policy? On the research front, yes, fund AI projects to have stimulation, support startups in AI from a technology perspective, definitely. On an SME level, the major push and drive is not putting them on that box, but drive stronger digitization and return on digitization, because it's going to give me the best return the next 3 to 5 years. Only after I've achieved those 5 years milestone and my digitization level of SMEs have matured up the digital model, I can start throwing in the AI, the big data elements. So sometimes we'll get lost into the buzzwords without seeing that there's a whole journey, and half of the, I would say more than half of the SMEs are not even up the journey enough. Yeah.
That's really relevant. If I can just give a quick comment on that. I don't know how much time we have left, but
last comment.
Yeah, one of my big concerns is that we're going the same way with AI as we are with the general data protection regulation, and is that we are, especially the institutions in Brussels, really want to regulate before there's actually a market, and before actually innovation can take place, and small companies can come up with new solutions, etc. And that we're basically thinking that by regulating and by putting boundaries here and there, that we will be leaders in the field, which is totally incorrect, I think. It's not because data protection and because there are so many restrictions on data protection through the GDPR that we're actually leaders in this branch of the economy. And I'm afraid that the Commission is doing the same mistake as with the GDPR now. For AI, by already having a very strict legal framework, and thinking that by doing so, we will be leaders in AI, but nothing is further from the truth, I think.
We don't even have enough base innovation coming out of the AI, so it's too early to legislate.
Absolutely.
It's definitely at the moment to fund innovation in AI, definitely, because we don't want to end up like it happened before, where we do not have a European base like a Google or an Amazon, and we're not investing in this type of forward-looking technology. But that's one box. Legislating now is, I don't know, a bit nonsense.
Thank you, Mr. Grech. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this very interesting discussion short as we are way over time. You will be pulled automatically into the plenary session, and then you are, of course, very welcome to give your comments over there during the allotted time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and see you in a few seconds.